Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Ref Telus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for today. We're going to be talking Parks and Rec in Atlanta. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And if you want to support this podcast, that's the best way to do it, is becoming a member. Your membership helps keep this podcast going. So now let me introduce today's guest. Justin Cutler is a recurring GovLove guest, and he's the current Commissioner of Parks and Recreation for the city of Atlanta, Georgia, a position he's been in since August of 2022. Previously, he served as the Recreation Division Director for Seattle Parks and Recreation. He was the Recreation Services Manager for Westminster, Colorado, and he's the Executive Director of the Sunset Empire Park and Rec District in Oregon. He's a certified Parks and Recreation executive from NRPA and has his MPA from Portland State University. Justin, welcome to GovLove. Thanks so much for joining us again. You've jumped around. You've been to a couple of places, I think, since your last appearance on GovLove.
Yeah, I don't recall, but thank you for having me, Ben. It's great to be here.
Cool. Yeah, you think you might have been in Westminster. I'll have to go back through the records, but that might have been there. It was an early episode of the pod, but. So we've got, as you know, we've got a tradition on the podcast to get to know our guests a little better. So my first lightning round question for you: what's the first concert that you went to?
Well, the first concert I went to as a child was Tim Noah, and he sang "Wow Wow Wibble Wazzle Wazzy Boodle Woo." But the first concert I went to as an adult was the Big Bad Voodoo Daddies in college, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed swing dancing, so got to see them in live.
That's awesome. And I think you were saying off mic that did you won a competition to see the concert, or just a swing dancing competition in general?
Yeah, well, as part of the promotion of the concert, they had like a dance contest, and I got second place, my partner and I. Oh, and awesome. Then we performed. I went to Washington State. We performed on Glen Terrell Mall as a way to promote the concert to get people to come out. So.
Very cool. Very cool. That's a fun. I will count that as your first concert, not the kids show. So that's a fun first concert. All right. Then what's the next line question for you? What's the last thing, movie, TV show that you watched?
Well, I had a good friend, my friend Joseph Harris. He turned me on to F1 racing. And so I'm starting season 1 on Netflix, and it's pretty fascinating. You know, the drivers, the cars, the companies. It's been interesting. So that's what I've been watching recently.
And what's the name of that series? Is that like Drive to Survive or whatever?
Yeah, Drive to Survive. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talking about it. I'm going to have to try it out. That's cool. All right, my next lightning round question for you. What book are you currently reading?
I'm reading a couple. I'm reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is a book just about embracing kind of the now, and consciousness, like being aware of what you think and being the watcher of kind of what you think and how that impacts your level of consciousness and your attitudes and how you show up. And then Night by Eli Wiesel. I didn't read that in high school for whatever reason, so my wife, she recommended the book, and I'm reading it. It's a lot to get through, but it's really good. Huh,
interesting. Cool. All right, and then my last lightning round question for you. Where do you go for inspiration?
Yeah, I go to a park. I go to nature. I really enjoy just getting out. And I also work on a boat. I've been building a boat over the last year. So I'm building a 16-foot skiff. And
what?
When I build the boat, I tend to it's kind of a Zen activity, and it allows me just to think. And it's been really relaxing, sometimes frustrating. But yeah, nature's really where I go for inspiration, and then where I go to kind of just relax is working on the boat. And hopefully this weekend I'll be able to take it out and actually put it in the water for the first time.
So really?
Yeah. So that'll be exciting.
Oh, wow.
We're talking about names for the boat, and we're going to name it Scylla after the Greek god that was turned into a 6-headed dog monster. So that's what we're going for. Scylla.
Cool. Very cool. What inspired you to want to build a boat?
Ironically, Minecraft. And that may sound kind of funny, but my son and I, during the pandemic, we were playing Minecraft, and you can build a boat in Minecraft. I think it takes like 2 oars and 6 blocks of wood. And I thought to myself, if I can do this in Minecraft, I got to be able to do it in real life. And I had been watching a gentleman on YouTube, and I was just like, I just got to do this. I don't know why I'm spending my time playing Minecraft, building boats on Minecraft. I got to go build it in real life. So I built a boat in real life.
That's really cool. You'll have to share a post from the boat when you take it out on its maiden voyage. Awesome. Well, in your bio, we covered a little bit of your kind of career path, but for you, how did you end up in local government, and how did you kind of end up at the city of Atlanta?
Yeah. Well, in local government, my first entry into that was working with the city of Portland as a playground supervisor. I went to school at Washington State for recreation administration, leisure studies. And then I originally wanted to go into camping ministries, working at camps. But for some reason, my life took a turn, and I went and worked at a summer playground where I really enjoyed it. And that got me hooked on local government. Then I was a recreation coordinator for the city of Wilsonville. And I started getting my MPA while working for the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. But just really enjoyed the opportunity to serve, to give back, to be engaged with community, to help and support people obtaining their life goals, right? And Wilsonville, one of the things I enjoyed most was our youth advisory council, engaging young people in local government, and also working with the Hispanic community to identify a computer lab that they could use in order to gain job skills and growth. And those two things really proud of, and just were really fulfilling. So I wanted to stay in local government, got my MPA, and the rest is history, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Were there things that like kept you in Parks and Rec? Because I imagine, especially once you get your MPA, there's you could get that same kind of fulfillment doing other facets of local government. So, is there something about Parks and Rec that you're like, I want to keep with this?
Yeah, I think cities are really fascinating. There's so many different components to what makes city work that people just take it for granted, right? Mm-hmm. And what I enjoy about Parks and Recreation is, on some level, it feels like a mini city within a city. I mean, we manage, typically Parks and Recreation agencies manage the bulk of the land for any city owns. We have park ranger programs, which just kind of operates like a police entity. We have lifeguards that are like our life and safety and fire folk. We have water quality issues at our pools that we have to manage, like water and sewer. We have to pick up trash at our parks. We have a large number of personnel that we manage to support our different programs and cleanliness of parks. So I think on some level it feels like a city within a city, but the diversity of opportunity, the diversity of experiences, and I mean, they made a show after Parks and Recreation, right? But I just really enjoy the variety of what I do on a daily basis, and then being able to see young people and old people and seniors participate in activities that you had a hand in creating, I think is just inspiring to really be able to bring families together. That's pretty important. So
yeah, very well said. Well said. Well, and as I was preparing for this interview, I kind of looked back at your LinkedIn and kind of the spots you've been along your career, and you've gone from much smaller organizations to now the city of Atlanta. So I'm just curious, like, what have you kind of seen over the course of your career about Parks and Rec, and especially as the organization size increases, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the things going on in Atlanta specifically, but as you kind of go up the scale in terms of organization and population served, like how does Parks and Rec kind of change, or what about that service maybe stays the same?
Yeah, I think fundamentally the service philosophically is the same in the sense of the roots of Parks and Recreation on the recreation side really come from Hull House and providing like a safe place for young people to come during the child labor movement of the 1800s, and when children were in factories, and then there was movement, and then there were safety regulations to help children kind of out of that environment. So the Hull House was really the first community center, and that provided a safe space for young people to gain education, to gain opportunity, to get a meal, clothing bank, all sorts of different services were provided at the nation's first community center. And so that's really the ethos of Parks and Recreation, is to serve, to provide space, to provide programs to help youth develop. And then it expanded into seniors, family programs, and then it made sense to add in parks and land management. And so I think when you think of smaller agencies at their core, they all share that same ethos, right? Of youth service, delivering parks opportunities. So in La Pine, Oregon, one of the newer cities in Oregon, back when I was there in 2010, I think it was the newest city. We had the same thing. I mean, we had the same ethos, right? We were providing youth programs. We had a youth soccer program. We had a youth baseball program. We had summer camps. We were working on developing a community center for the town. And even in Atlanta, Georgia, I mean, we still have the same ethos, right? We provide youth services. We provide different activities. We manage sports fields. It's just on a different scale. It's more complex. So you need more administration. You need more human resource management. You have to think differently about leadership. But the ethos and the philosophy are really central. And I think that's what I enjoy about Parks and Recreation, no matter where you go. So that's what I find fascinating, but also that's what's challenging is as agencies expand, the complexity, the politics, the decision-making process, that's what changes. But the heart of what Parks and Recreation is really doesn't change, in my opinion, from what I've seen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned leadership. So how has leadership looked different in La Pine doing this kind of work versus in Atlanta?
In La Pine, Oregon, I was the executive director. I was the very first executive director, and I hired employee number 2. They just passed their tax rate, and prior to my arrival, they were managed by volunteers and the occasional staff person that was supported by a grant. And then I was able to hire a couple staff, and today, I mean, I follow their Facebook page, and they're doing a phenomenal job in La Pine, Oregon. It's pretty impressive what they do with the resources they have. At the time, and I think even still today, they collect cans, and every year we generate about $15,000 in recycled cans.
Oh, wow.
Which was impressive, right?
Yeah.
And even we'd have people steal our cans. But at the end of the day, at that small of organization, I was running events, I was running the soccer leagues, I was coaching the soccer program. So you were heavily involved. Now, I'm so far from the work sometimes, it's difficult to know what's going on. And so you have to cultivate a culture in a different way than you had to in La Pine, being a smaller community. So thinking about how do I show up at work? What expectations I set? How do I lead, right? How do I coach and support the team that we have at the management level? How does that translate to the services that people experience on the ground? And just how do we inspire and create a common vision together? Those are the challenges that are different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fascinating.
It's easy to lead yourself, right? I mean, on some level, it's just, now there's a team of people, but I think that's what I enjoy too, is I enjoy the complexity. That's fun now. So.
Yeah. Leading a team of 2 is less complicated, I imagine.
Yeah. It's just different, it's different fun.
So, that's a good transition to kind of talking about your work in Atlanta. So I'm curious, stepping into a new role in a new place. How do you get to know, how did you go about getting to know kind of the organization and figuring out what that leadership needed to look like to kind of, set the the culture that you wanted to set?
Yeah. I think anytime you go into an organization or you start a new role, it's important to have a plan. I think several books that have helped me, the first 90 days, first 100 days has been a really pivotal book. The other one is You're in Charge, Now What? I feel like You're in Charge, Now What is a simpler framework. There's 5 central questions. What's working well? What's not working well? What do you hope I do? What are you concerned I do? And what advice do you have for me? And those questions kind of help facilitate your understanding or create an understanding of where the organization is at, where your immediate team is at, and then what needs to be achieved. And then I also think Patrick Lencioni's the book The Advantage has been really helpful. It talks a lot about organizational health, meeting management. And so I've tried to use those techniques. But sometimes things happen. Week 1 or day 2 on the job, we had a homicide in one of our parks. And so I had kind of a plan, but immediately had to shift towards managing and working really closely with the chief of police on how we are going to manage public safety in our parks, because there were several incidents that occurred in the first couple of weeks. So we launched a public safety program where we were working to create more pro-social activities in our parks. We worked with the police to get out in our parks. We identified the parks that needed the most assistance and are working to install video cameras in those parks. We were able to obtain our first park ranger through a recaptured officer program. When an officer retires, they came on board, and now they're serving as our first park ranger, and he's doing a great job. So on some level, I had to pivot and really focus on the immediate, which was somewhat difficult.
Yeah.
But I think I was really intentional, visited each of the different work sites of our park maintenance team. I've been to several community centers, met with different groups of recreation staff. One of the complex things about Atlanta is 1 in every $5 that's spent on parks and recreation services comes from a Friends Conservancy or a nonprofit group. And so there's a large number of nonprofits and friends groups that I wanted to meet, introduce myself and get to know them, hear their concerns. And so even month 10, I'm still meeting different groups. I'm still meeting new groups. I'm still really the new person on the block. I'm building relationships, getting to know the community. And that's been a lot of fun. But at the same time, it feels that it's taken longer than maybe I thought. And I think with bigger organizations, you just have to have more patience. I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned. So, but having a plan, I think, is still central. And so using those questions from You're in Charge Now have been helpful throughout my career, even in the Pine. I found the book back in 2010, and it's helped me throughout my career as I've made different transitions.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it's probably helpful to think through that at each level of the organization too, as you kind of indicated. Like it's not just the people reporting to you, but trying to learn what other at every level as you get to bigger organizations, what they're concerned about and what you can learn from them. So I'm curious. You're a West Coast guy, and this is a pretty far relocation for you. So what was it about the city of Atlanta that made you want to relocate for this role, and what were some of the things that maybe excited you about this role in as a Parks and Rec commissioner?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think the vision that Mayor Andre Dickens has for the city of Atlanta, one safe city with one bright future, and really he's stated that he wants Atlanta to be the best place to raise a child in the United States. And I think that is a bold vision, and it's that vision that is inspiring to me, inspiring to our staff. And I think that really compelled me and my family to move across the country. We have this 2023 and into 2024 is the year of the youth. And so we're really focused on youth outcomes. How are we providing job opportunities? How are we providing after school opportunities? How are we just meeting the needs to make sure that young people in Atlanta have the opportunity to be successful at whatever they want to achieve, whether it's enlisting, finding a job, being an entrepreneur, being an artist. We want our young people in Atlanta, Georgia to be successful. And that's why I chose to come to Atlanta, was just the opportunity to work for this administration and work for Mayor Andre Dickens and really come alongside him and support his vision for what Parks and Recreation could be in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's very exciting. So, coming in with like a big, initiative like that, like trying to create a better place for youth or allow them to achieve kind of what they want to achieve. Like, how do you come in and figure out what are the ways that Parks and Rec can plug into that, or what are the things what are the gaps in the community where Parks and Rec makes sense to help create that environment or that community, or to serve those youth?
Yeah. Well, Charles Jordan from the city of Portland, he was a former Parks commissioner. He was quoted as saying, when children are with Parks and Recreation professionals, they aren't committing crimes. They aren't getting into trouble, right? We know that when a child is in a community center, when they're in our youth sports program, when they're participating in a summer camp, we got your back, right? We got that child, and they're safe. They're in a healthy environment. They're getting a meal. They're maybe getting a swim lesson, doing some arts and crafts program, experiencing new things. And that's really the power of Parks and Recreation, is we prevent children from making bad choices. We provide them the opportunity to learn how to relate to each other through sports. We provide children the opportunity to experience new experiences through field trips and swim lessons and sports activities. There's a lot that we do related to STEM and STEAM, where kids can be exposed to videography, using drones for videos. And that's really the power of Parks and Rec, to intervene in a child's life, is to be that third space for children when they may not be able to go home after school, or they need additional support, or they just want to have fun. I mean, we provide fun opportunities. That's what we do. And that's the power of Parks and Recreation. And to that aim, we recognize that, we need to be centers of choice. So people have many different options now in Atlanta and beyond. They can choose to go to Little Gym. They can choose to go to their YMCA. They can choose to go to Boys and Girls Club. There's a ton of youth nonprofit sports organizations in Atlanta and around the country that people have choice. And so making sure that our programs are of a high quality at a reasonable price, and that people want to do what we offer. So really focusing on quality and opportunity. Also working with nonprofits who may need space to deliver programs. And so how can we leverage our community centers to that end? And then focusing on early learning. The mayor's also committed in a big way to working with Atlanta Public Schools and early learning centers to make sure that our young people start off on the right foot. So how can we intervene during the day when we have older adults and seniors in our centers, but also how can we provide opportunities for stay-at-home caregivers, nannies, TIA type programs for caregivers, so that they can bring children to our community centers, so that children get socialization, they get engagement, they have fun, and learn new things in our community centers. And then also youth program quality. Most states in America now have an out-of-school time office, or have some type of out-of-school time collective impact organization. And so in Georgia, we have GSAN, or Georgia Statewide After School Network. And so we're working with them to evaluate the programs that we offer and to go through kind of an audit of our program, looking at best practices related to curriculum, look at best practices related to just policies and procedures, to make sure that we are the best we can be. Again, back to that point of quality. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that we're relevant and engaged and near the youth.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. And, well, that kind of, I'm curious about like how you work across departments. And like you mentioned the police earlier, and then you mentioned public schools there, and community centers and nonprofits. And how do you kind of, and I think also your perspective coming into the organization new is probably useful too. Like, how do you come in and how does the department work across both departments in the city, and then with, nonprofits or community organizations, and how do you engage them to be like, let's try something new, or we have this new initiative that we want to, try do something different than maybe what's been done in the past?
Yeah, I think it's about, getting people in a room, having that conversation and engaging them in that vision. Back in January, we launched an effort through a youth summit where we brought together youth nonprofits to talk about Year of the Youth, to talk about ways to plug in. We have a vendor system here in which we contract with different nonprofits and different commercial organizations to deliver services at our community centers. Where we pay them, and then we charge a small fee for that service at our community center. And so we brought together different vendors and social service providers, talked about kind of what we hope to achieve, what outcomes we want to achieve. And then that way they knew when they applied to be a vendor that what we were aiming for, so that they could make sure that the services they were offering were aligned with our vision. So we continue to do more of that. Part of it is just getting out, meeting with people, and being the new person that's somewhat convenient. It's kind of built in, hey, I have to go meet people to introduce myself. And so that fosters a level of engagement. I think those are two ways. I think the other way is Parks and Recreation. And I know your audience is city managers, kind of administration and mid managers, and they know that if they need to get something done, they call Parks and Rec.
Yep.
They show up, right? We have oftentimes we have the meeting space, we have the vehicles, we have the staff, we have the resources in order to achieve the result. And we have the attitude. Parks and Recreation people are flexible. They know how to adapt to change. I mean, I think the pandemic's a perfect example where you saw many community centers across America closed down, and immediately Parks and Recreation people stepped in. They started distributing food. They became shelters. They became hubs for learning. They distributed vaccines. They became centers just for all sorts of different activities. But the staff pivoted immediately in order to do something different. I think that's the heart, again, of Parks and Recreation professionals. And that's kind of how we're integral to the fabric of cities. So
yeah. So one of the, as I was prepping for this interview, one of the things I read was that you identified inequitable access to green space as one of the kind of barriers in Atlanta. And so, can you give us a sense of kind of what that looks like in Atlanta, the green space access, and how you guys are kind of working on that issue?
Yeah, green space access is critical, and one of the components of the mayor's vision for the city of Atlanta, and making sure that all residents are within a 10-minute walk of a park or a trail. And so we work with the Trust for Public Land when we use their park score. And if you're listening to this podcast, the park score just came out recently. So if you go to tpl.org and look at park score, you can see where the top 100 cities in America rank and how it relates to equity, monetary investment in parks, and quality of the parks. And that's a great benchmark that a lot of cities use to see how they compare to their neighbors in other states and locally. So we use that, the Trust for Public Land map, to help inform where we need to acquire property. And then we overlay that with our equity data tool that looks at historic redlining, health disparities, different socioeconomic factors. And so we look at where are the needs within those different kind of lenses, and that then pinpoints the target areas that we want to be acquiring property. So then we work with our partner, the Conservation Fund, and they help negotiate acquisitions on our behalf. And last year we were able to acquire over 268 acres of new parkland. And so every year going forward from this point, we would like to be able to acquire 200 plus acres. So we've developed kind of a pipeline model of where, we know we want to be within, 100% of our neighbors within a 10-minute walk. We know that we need to ask, maybe 100 to 200 people, right, a year, maybe less. I mean, we only have so much time, but we know we need to ask a lot of people a lot of questions, right? And then we maintain a prospect list, and so we use the equity data tool to inform where we want to buy a property. We work with our partner to identify which parcels we want to buy, and then they're able to quietly negotiate on our behalf those parcels, and then we are able to acquire them from the Conservation Fund once they're under their control. And so it's been a great system. It's one of the first it's one of the first models I've seen. And mostly in other cities, they'll have like a real estate division that works on the negotiation, or they'll work with the Trust for Public Land or other nonprofits. But the system in Atlanta is pretty impressive, and definitely a model for other communities to consider. And the other thing too is that the Conservation Fund, I keep wanting to say the Nature Conservancy, but the Conservation Fund, what they've developed here in Georgia, or in Atlanta specifically, is they went to foundations, and they were able to obtain resources to create a revolving loan fund. So they're able to buy the property ahead of time. We commit up front that we're going to buy the property from them, but they're able to buy the property ahead of time and that then allows us to go through our traditional government process, but it allows us to be more nimble and be more intentional with which properties we want to acquire.
Yeah.
So that's how we use equity and data to expand the data opportunity and identify how are we going to be more just in our park system.
Yeah. Well, 200 acres a year, that's a pretty big scale. Just like adding acreage and adding parkland and stuff that you'll need to maintain and program.
And sometimes it comes in big chunks. I mean, last year we had one that was like 180 acres. And then sometimes it comes in smaller chunks. We're buying acre parcels that abut existing parks to create better access. But sometimes what you'll have is you'll have a parcel that's within several homes, and it's only accessible to like a street on the south end. But if you're able to buy a parcel on the north end, then it increases your accessibility, so people don't have to walk all the way around. So sometimes we'll buy like eco parcels when a house is vacant, or there's a tax lien on it. We'll work with the county to obtain the parcel through the tax lien process. So,
Interesting. That's cool. And I imagine because a 10-minute walk has a transportation component here. Do you work at all with planning or public works or transportation department to think about like how do we make it easier for people to just walk around the city so that they can then walk to parks?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? It's a 10-minute walk, right? But is your walk safe?
Yeah.
Is there a sidewalk? Is there a bike lane to get to the park? I mean, I could technically walk to 10 minutes to a park, but am I going to get hit by a car on the way? And I think that's what you're asking, right? And so we try to work with. We work with our Department of Transportation, but it is difficult. I think in some parts of our community there aren't sidewalks, and so then it's a conversation of either how do we get a sidewalk in, how do we get a trail in, but sidewalks are critical infrastructure to make sure that people can get to that park.
Yeah. So you mentioned the equity data tool. Can you talk about more about what kind of is part of that? Like what are the things that you're looking at? I know you mentioned kind of historic redlining and probably demographic information, but like what is that kind of, what goes into that, and how do you guys kind of make sure that's up to date and as you're kind of using it to make decisions?
Yeah. So our DPR EDT, or DPR equity data tool, if you go to activate-atl.com, you can check it out. There's many different layers that are embedded in this very robust tool. But we have different health data, air pollution, socioeconomic data, racial ethnic data, historic redlining data. So there's a lot of different layers. We normalize the data, and then we create composite scores. And that then kind of ranks the quality or the score of the park. So for instance, like we take into consideration physical park condition, physical recreation center condition, private funding. We look at community needs score. We look at level of service. We look at community perception. We also, every year, we send out a team of parks and recreation professionals to assess the park. What is the quality of the grass? What is the quality of the park bench? What is the quality of the restroom?
Yeah.
And so we use that information then to feed into the census tract data to then populate the map and look at access, opportunity, quality. And so we created this mapping tool, which is great. But then we also held 3 community sessions. We gave a presentation to City Council and held 3 community sessions to help our neighbors and our friends groups understand and think about how can they use the tool. I think oftentimes in local government, we'll create these tools, we'll put them out there and we say, go get them. And then people, they may not know how to interact with it. So it was really important to the team and I that we had these kind of sessions. We had 3 work sessions. I think we had over 30 different people attend to learn about how to use the data tool, which was great. And Sabina Kusimova and Tara Buckner have done a phenomenal job just updating the tool. They're really the 2 individuals that led the way and kind of creating the tool and implementing it. And so then annually we go in and we update the quality, which then leads to the different scores. And so we use that information then to apply for grants. So this last year, we worked with, we just recently received some additional ARPA funds. And so we're making investments at Stonehogan, which was the #1 park on our list. We've had some cleanup days. They've been able to get some additional grant dollars. So we've been using that information to make decisions on how are we going to spend dollars within our community. I think it's also important to say, though, that it's important to say that we can't use the tool as a shield, right? Because there will be other factors, right? This is a tool in our toolbox. It's not the tool. And I think sometimes communities and even parks and recreation professionals, we can get, we have this perfect tool. It tells us we should invest dollars here, but sometimes there's going to be other factors that mean that you have to invest over here, right? Or in a different community. And so I think as long as you keep in mind when you use these types of tools that it is one tool, it's not the tool. and kind of hold the tension of both and that, yes, you can have the data tool and you can still, and you need, community input, and you need the political input, right, as to where to spend the dollars. And so I think that tension is good, but now we have the data to help support that tension too. And to know, when we're making a decision, well, what factors do we need to consider, and what is the impact then of that decision?
Huh. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's one of the tools in your toolbox, and I assume it's also like informing kind of capital investments in terms of like, I don't know, like playground replacements, or like, we're going to upgrade this facility in this park or whatever, right?
Yeah. I think the other component that parks and recreation agencies are starting to do too is asset management.
Yeah. It sounds very similar to asset management. That's what I was thinking as you were talking. It was like, this sounds exactly like what I hear from utilities people.
Well, exactly. Right. I mean, I think what's interesting is the level of service within parks and recreation is more of it's different than water and sewer, right? Like when I flush the toilet, I want my poop to go downhill.
Yeah.
Right. When I go to a park, I expect there to be certain things in that park. I expect there to be a trash can. I expect there maybe to be a bathroom. But some communities choose not to put bathrooms in their park. Some communities choose to do ball fields, or they choose to do pickleball, or they choose to do tennis, or they choose to do a splash pad. So there's a little bit more choice within parks' level of service. So I think the important thing with parks and recreation is you need to be engaged in your community to understand what is the desired level of service.
Yeah.
And what is the desired level of service that people are willing to pay for?
Yeah.
Because I may want my park to look like Disney World or Disneyland, but that's a high cost. Am I willing to pay that much to have that experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the conversation intersects then with level of services. I'm willing to pay, let's say, $10 a month for Parks and Rec. Well, that means then you can have a park that the trash gets picked up every other day and the lawn gets mowed every 10 days.
Yeah.
And you have to be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're willing to pay more, or unless you have a friends group, or unless you have a conservancy or other factors. But I think that's the difference between, I pay a fee to have the poop go downhill versus, Parks and Rec. It can be a little more ambiguous, and it's based on community need and desire and willingness to pay.
Well, and it's also it's more qualitative too, right? It's the perception of the park. How does it feel? Like, is it safe? It's not as like, this is the volume of, I like that we keep going back to this, the volume of poop going through the pipe that needs to be treated, right?
Yeah.
Like it's also like, how do I feel safe when I go into this park? Does it have all the amenities that I'm looking for, which, aren't math equations in the same way.
But I mean, I think there's real dollars and cents when it comes to park infrastructure. And that's what asset management strives to quantify when you talk about Parks and Rec is, leaders historically have made this investment in this asset, and it's incumbent upon us as the current administrators to either, divest of that asset or invest in that asset. But how much does that asset cost, current value, and then future replacement value? You need to understand that. And I think that's really critical.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's fascinating. And then the engagement piece of it, that it seems like that's pretty key to kind of your guys' approach, is like going out and figuring out what does the community think about this park or want, willing to pay for or fundraise for.
Yeah. And I think then that gets back to the equity conversation too, because what we find is that not every community can have a friends group they can have a friends group, but can they raise the dollars? And, one in every $5 in Atlanta comes from a nonprofit. But we do have some very large conservancies. We have Piedmont Park Conservancy, Chastain, Grant, Oakland Cemetery, and a couple others to name a few. And so we have these large conservancies that have $1 million budgets in some cases, or even $100,000 budgets, right, or tens of thousands of dollar budgets. But they have budgets, they have staff, and then you take some of our other friends groups, and they can't afford a staff member, but we have a nonprofit called Park Pride that helps to facilitate all the friends groups, which is a great value to our community, and they do a phenomenal job. They kind of act as an intermediary, but then that creates inequity and investment where some parks you're able to augment your maintenance per acre upwards of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Our base investment is $5,500 per acre, and now you have another entity coming in and adding value to that. So it does create inequity. And so our challenge is, as local government, is you have these groups that are investing in your parks. how are you then translating that and making sure that that park is accessible for everybody? But if I can't get to that park because transportation is an issue for me, how is my neighborhood park that I can walk to, can I get that same experience? And so I think as government administrators, that's what we have to wrestle with is, okay, this conservancy is doing a great job over here, but how are we also managing the park that may not have a conservancy to make sure that it's of similar quality and similar experience and safe for that neighbor that can't get to that other park? And I think that's one of the bigger challenges.
That's a fascinating challenge because that $1 in $5 is obviously not distributed equally to all of your parks. I imagine the ones that have those big, annual funding or augmented maintenance budgets are probably the ones in nice parts of town that have the money to fundraise and add to their friends group, right?
Yeah. But I think the thing that the conservancies of land that have done a really good job is they recognize that they own their responsibility in that, and they work really hard to make sure that the parks are welcoming and inviting and open to all. Piedmont Park, they host numerous events across the year that everyone comes to in our city. Right?
Yeah.
And you're only going to have one Piedmont Park, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a regional destination. You aren't going to have Piedmont Parks across the city, but how do you create similar experiences in other parts of your community? And so that's what we are looking at is how do we create, neighborhood concerts or other, unique features at, like Westside Park, for instance, our most recent larger park. So I think we just have to think differently and think about how are we investing our discretionary dollars in a sense in to make sure that the experience is somewhat similar, but also recognizing that each park is unique and each park is based on the needs within that specific community. Yeah. But that each park should be of high quality. And I think that's what we try to strive for.
Yeah. You want everything to be high quality, but it's not necessarily going to be the same park to park because you have some that are regional attractions and probably even, not everyone. A lot of people have heard of Piedmont Park that don't live in Atlanta. So.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So you kind of touched on something earlier in our conversation that I also saw as I was prepping for this interview about and it kind of feeds into this, conversation about doing things in all of these parks and, making them, of great quality and activating them. But you talked about, or I think I saw on your website, one of the things to increase public safety in parks is like activating them, getting folks into parks. And then you mentioned kind of starting a park ranger sort of program. So I'm just curious about kind of how you guys think about that activation piece with public safety in kind of parks. And I don't know, like what that's been like kind of wrestling with that tension where, there may be neighborhoods that don't want that public safety presence, but at the same time, you want to make the park, feel safe and feel welcoming and inviting.
Yeah. I think it gets to the point of what are parks for? And I think, parks are for, enjoyment, recreation, social gatherings, taking naps, having a good time, pitching a hammock, enjoying football, frisbee, basketball, tennis, all sorts of sports, right? That's what parks are about. And I think the difficult part is when people perceive different uses as being in conflict. So a good example is, I go to a park, I take a nap. I lie in the grass, I take a nap. A person who may be perceived as being homeless or of a different socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, they take a nap in a park, and oftentimes people are discriminated against when it comes to that action of napping. And I think, people will call me and say, well, this person's loitering in your park. Well, parks are for loitering.
Yeah.
Parks are
That's why we have them,
right? Parks are for you to take a break. Parks are for you to relax. So what I like to focus on is the antisocial behavior. So if a person is having a mental health crisis, if a person is, drinking alcohol in our parks, that's why a lot of parks have no alcohol policies. If somebody is, violating a park rule, like littering in a park, that is what we work to tackle, not somebody taking a nap in a park unless they're in a tent, unless they have all their belongings there. Those are different circumstances, and so you have to be sensitive and you have to address that. But parks are open in Atlanta from 6 a.m. in the morning till 11 p.m. at night. And if you're in the park from after 11 and before 6, then, we have some concerns and we'll work with you to move out of the park. But I think you have to focus on the behavior and the park rules versus the person and what you may perceive they're doing or not doing in your park. And I think that's the challenge, right? That's where you have to make that judgment call. Because loitering in a park is what we want you to do. We want you to have fun in our park. We want you to use our park. We want you to play games in our park. We want you to be in our parks. And it's just when there's conflicts that's when you have to be careful, right? And you have to kind of walk that fine line. So I think related to our park ranger program, I think that's where, there are issues in our parks. We know that there's people both committing crimes in our parks. We've had homicides in our parks. We've had reckless driving. We have people parking on our grass. We have illegal vending in our parks. And so we recently established a park ranger program to tackle those issues. So, and we have one ranger for 400 plus parks, and he's doing a phenomenal job.
It's a pretty big beat. Yeah.
Addressing the concerns. He works Wednesday through Sunday because that's when we need support. On the weekends for sure. And oftentimes we'll have people that do pop-up events or unpermitted events, and he's chasing them down and asking them to move along, move out of our park because we have a permit process. If people, oftentimes when they don't get permits, then they cause damage, and we don't have no way of recovering the damage, the cost of that damage. So that's why it's really critical. But again, I always come back to, we want people in our parks. We want them using our parks. And that's the really important thing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well said. And I can hear you wrestling with that because there are some tensions there, some natural tensions. And so it's fascinating to hear you. You've obviously thought a lot about it, but so that's interesting. So we've got a couple minutes left together. So, but I got a couple more questions I wanted to ask, just kind of reflecting on both your time so far at the city and then what you're looking forward to working on. But it's been not quite a year. I think you said 10 months on the job. So what are maybe some things that have surprised you about this role or the city? And what are some things that maybe you're proud to have worked on in those first 10 months?
Yeah, I think what surprised me about Atlanta, is there's a lot of people that really care about their parks. And I think that's been a lot of fun, is just meeting people, hear what their dreams and hopes are for their park. I really enjoy that. I think how green it is in Atlanta. And how hilly it is.
Yeah.
I think that's been the most surprising thing. Coming from the Pacific Northwest, I will admit I was ignorant to the topography of the South. I assumed that everything from the Rockies east was flat.
Yeah.
That is my ignorant opinion, and I'll fully own that. So coming to Atlanta and thinking, okay, like we need to build pickleball courts, or we need to build sports fields, and then you can't find a flat piece of land that isn't in a floodplain. You just can't. And I think that's the funny thing that like I always chuckle. I always laugh at myself because I'm like, why didn't you think that there would be hills in Georgia, right? And so it's funny that Atlanta sits at about 900 feet above sea level, which again you kind of think, oh, you're in a city. Most cities are at sea level. They're by bodies of water, and Atlanta grew up around the railroad. It was originally called Terminus. And so it's always been the center of transportation. And so that's why Atlanta's here. But I think I just laugh at myself for thinking that everything was flat east of the Rockies, which was a very ignorant opinion.
Yeah, everything's flat except for that. There's a small hill called the Appalachians that we don't count as mountains out west. Yeah.
Well, I worked this summer in New York, right? And they're always like, oh, yeah, these big mountains. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't have snow on them. I don't see any mountains.
That's funny. And then what are you kind of working on next? What is something that you're excited about working on in the next 6 months, a year that our listeners should look out for?
Yeah. So Mayor Dickens in his proposed budget for fiscal year 24 has given us a 6.5% increase, and so looking forward to we're hiring 2 operation consultants right now, or operation coaches. We're still working out the title, but these 2 individuals will be focused on parks and recreation, and one dedicated to each team, and they'll be focused on process improvement using Lean, Six Sigma techniques to help identify ways that we can improve our work, improve our performance, and support staff in that process. It's not about coming and applying these techniques on people. It's about cultivating a culture of continuous improvement. So that's something that I'm really excited about. I'm excited that we will have more maintenance staff joining our team to help meet our service level expectations. We'll have more recreation staff joining our team to be able to offer Saturday and hopefully Sunday hours when people are available to recreate. And then continue to lean in around program quality and improvement, making sure that our programs are the best they can be, that we have events at our community centers and recreation services that match the need of our community. So, those are the things I'm really excited about. And then in 2024, the National Recreation Parks Association will have their annual conference in Atlanta. So
cool.
Excited to be hosting that. The National League of Cities will be here this fall. So if you'd like a tour of any of our facilities or hear something that I talked about today, happy to, if you want to come to Atlanta and hang out in the Parks and Rec offices, we could do a little tour. But National League of Cities will be in Atlanta in the fall of 2023. So excited about that. We'll have some parks on our tour. On tours, I think we'll have Cook Park, which is a water quality, which is like a water partnership with Watershed Management, which is our stormwater group. So you'll see stormwater infrastructure and a park built next to each other. It's right by the stadium. It'll probably be a walking tour. So there'll be a lot to highlight, but I think those are the things I'm looking forward to, is just being able to continue the good work. We have a great team in Atlanta, Georgia. People want to do the right thing. And I think a lot of it's about staff empowerment and just supporting them to do the right thing.
Cool. Very cool. Well, NRPA in Atlanta in 2024, I'm going to have to put that on my calendar. That sounds great. Yeah. All right.
And then National League of Cities, right?
And National League of Cities. Yeah. So then the last question on GovLove, it's usually the hardest one. So if you could be the GovLove DJ and pick the exit music for this interview, what song would you pick?
Well, the song that came first to mind was Thunderstruck by AC/DC.
Yeah.
I really like that song.
Okay, perfect. We'll get that queued up.
It's kind of like some good hype music, right?
Yeah. You throw that on and then go into a park. You're gonna have yourself a nice day.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that ends our episode for today. Justin, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me, sharing the great work going on in Atlanta and all about your career. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time, Ben. I wish you all the best, and hope to see people in Atlanta at NLC in the fall or NRPA in 2024.
Awesome. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. Subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. Thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.